Water splashed across my face so hard the glass cracked on the tile. "Give back my mother's jewelry!" My sister Tiffany screamed. Not our mother, her mother. She made sure everyone heard it that way. It happened in the church hall after Mama's funeral repast. Paper plates and grief everywhere. People whispering gentle lies. She's in a better place. When Tiffany chose violence with a thrown glass of ice water and a voice sharp enough to cut bread. Conversations froze. Forks hovered. Even the children went quiet. I stood dripping, black dress clinging, mascara sliding like an apology. Collard greens, lemon cake, cheap coffee, everything smelled like sorrow. Pastor Williams's wife stepped forward, then back. No one knew where to look. "Tiffany," I said, swallowing salt and shame. "Please stop." "Stop?" She laughed like glass breaking. "You've been stealing from us since hospice, and now you want me to stop." "Us? Her and Mama, not me." "I never touched Mama's jewelry," she pointed at my chest, finger trembling. "You took the velvet case, the gold bangles, the ruby earrings, the locket. You took everything and ran. I hadn't run. I'd stayed at the hospital every night, counting Mama's breaths between morphine dreams. But the room had already chosen a side. People believe what's shouted." "Ruth," Aunt Bernice whispered. "Just tell the truth, baby." The truth was messy. The night before Mama died, she pressed a folded napkin into my palm. "Don't be afraid to open what's already yours." In her careful handwriting, ledger blue. "Key, teapot, ring, ask a vet." "Search me," I said, hands open. "Bag car. Call the police." "I didn't take what wasn't mine." Pastor Williams raised his hands. "Daughters, this is not the place. But humiliation loves an audience. So does truth." "You have until Friday," Tiffany said, heels clicking like a countdown. "I'm filing to be executor." "You won't touch a thing." She hadn't been named. She just wanted the keys before probate even opened. People returned to their plates, but they chewed the story instead. That night, I went home, slid the thin brass teapot key into the cold belly of Mama's old kettle, and turned. A tin lifted free from the false bottom. Inside, Mama's leather journal and a worn pawn ticket copy tucked in a blue ledger that listed $8,500 and $12,000 in Mama's neat script. At the back, a note in ink that hadn't yet faded. "For questions about the ring, locket, ask Yvette." Friday would come, with witnesses. And with proof. Before we go on, tell me where you're listening from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories coming soon. The first time Tiffany accused me of stealing, it was not in private. It was in front of 30 people, half of whom had never liked me to begin with. The funeral had ended only an hour earlier. Our mother's body was still fresh in the ground, the earth not yet settled over her coffin. But grief wasn't enough to stop Tiffany. She had always loved an audience. I was arranging plates of cornbread on the table in the church fellowship hall when the sound of footsteps and a sharp intake of breath warned me she was behind me. Before I could turn, cold water hit my face, a full glass thrown hard enough to shatter on the tile. Gasps rippled through the room like wind through leaves. "Give back my mother's jewelry," she screamed, voice breaking through the stunned silence. It was the "my" that cut deeper than the water. She always said "my," never "our." In that single word was everything Tiffany believed: the rightful heir, the golden daughter, the keeper of Mama's legacy. And that I, Ruth, was just the afterthought. "Tiffany," I whispered, blinking through the sting, "I don't have it." "Liar!" Her voice trembled with rage. "The velvet case is gone. The gold bangles, the ruby earrings, all missing. You're the only one who's been in Mama's room." I stared at her, at the anger twisting her face, and for a moment I almost laughed. Because if anyone had been in Mama's room more than me, it was Tiffany herself, sneaking in late at night, closing the door when she thought I was asleep, whispering into the phone about appraisals and insurance policies. But I said none of that. Instead, I stood dripping in silence as the whispers swelled around me. Cousins exchanged knowing glances. Aunt Bernice shook her head. Even the pastor's wife looked away. Tiffany smiled, a cold, satisfied curve of the lips. The room had already chosen a side, and in that moment I knew this wasn't about jewelry. This was a declaration of war. 2 days after the funeral, I walked into the mahogany-paneled office of Rhodes and Willis Law Group, the firm Mama had trusted for decades, with a knot in my stomach. Tiffany was already there, sitting perfectly composed in a black silk dress and oversized sunglasses, like a widow in a movie. When she saw me, her lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "You're late," she said flatly. "I'm right on time," I replied, sinking into the chair opposite her. Mr. Willis, Mama's longtime attorney, cleared his throat and began reading the will. At first, everything was as expected. The church donation, small bequests to charities, even the distribution of household items. But when he reached the part about the estate, Tiffany leaned forward like a cat about to pounce. "To my daughters, Tiffany and Ruth," Mr. Willis read, "I leave the contents of my jewelry collection to be shared equally, but with the understanding that certain items hold family significance and shall remain with Ruth for safekeeping." Tiffany's head snapped toward me. "Excuse me?" Mr. Willis looked over his glasses. "It's all very clear. The collection is to be divided equally, but specific pieces, the ruby earrings, the gold bangles, the locket, were designated as Ruth's responsibility." "Responsibility?" Tiffany repeated, her voice rising. "What does that even mean?" "They're mine too." "Your mother trusted Ruth with them," Mr. Willis said gently. "There's a note explaining why." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Mama's delicate handwriting. Tiffany lunged to grab it, but Mr. Willis stopped her. "This is for Ruth only." Her jaw tightened, rage simmering beneath her polished exterior. As we left, she brushed past me without a word, her perfume sharp and suffocating. But I caught her muttering under her breath as she walked away. "If you think you're keeping those jewels, you've lost your damn mind." And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about inheritance. This was about control, power, and a lifelong rivalry about to explode. As I reached the door, Mr. Willis called after me, almost as an aside. "If you find anything else in your mother's things, bring it to me or to Mr. Rhodes. Your mother liked to keep duplicates where people wouldn't think to look." That night, long after the house had gone quiet, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the envelope Mr. Willis had handed me. Mama's handwriting, soft, looping, familiar, made my heart ache. I traced the letters with my finger before finally tearing it open. "My dear Ruth, if you're reading this, I'm gone, but I need you to know why I made the decisions I did. The jewelry is more than gold and stones. Some of those pieces were gifts from my mother and her mother before her. Others were from your father, promises he made and kept, even when times were hard. I'm trusting you with them, not because I love Tiffany less, but because I know you understand their meaning. You'll protect them, and you'll protect what our family truly stands for. Tiffany is strong, but her strength often becomes pride, and pride can make people reckless. If she fights you over this, don't meet fire with fire. Stand firm, but stay dignified. That jewelry is a legacy, not a weapon." With all my love, Mama tears blurred the ink as I read those words again and again. Mama had always seen through both of us. She knew Tiffany's impulsive streak, her obsession with appearances, her habit of equating love with possession. And she knew me, quiet, patient, often overlooked, but steadfast. I tucked the letter back into its envelope and placed it in my desk drawer. It felt like a shield, a reminder that this wasn't just about shiny stones in a velvet box. It was about history. The next morning, Tiffany called. "No greeting, no pretense. I want Mama's bangles," she said. "All of them. And that locket, too. You have no right to keep them." "They were entrusted to me," I replied calmly. Mama's words, not mine. There was a long silence. Then her voice turned cold. "If you think a piece of paper will stop me, you're wrong." And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. This wasn't over. It had only begun. 3 days after the will reading, Tiffany showed up at my house unannounced. I heard the screech of her car tires in the driveway before the bell rang. Twice, sharp and impatient. When I opened the door, she pushed past me without a word, storming straight into the living room. "Where is it?" she snapped, spinning around to face me. "Where is what?" I asked, my heart already racing. "The ruby earrings. The bangles. Mama's gold locket." "Don't play dumb, Ruth. They're in the safe," I said evenly. "Exactly where Mama told me to keep them." She scoffed and folded her arms. "You? You don't even wear jewelry. You don't appreciate it. Those pieces were meant to stay in the family, not locked up like museum artifacts." I took a deep breath, reminding myself of Mama's letter. "I am family, Tiffany. And Mama trusted me with them." That's the end of it. Her eyes narrowed, venom swirling just beneath the surface. "End of it? Oh no, sweetheart. This is just the beginning. You think a few scribbles on a piece of paper mean anything? I deserve those pieces. I was the one who took care of Mama when she was sick. I was the one who planned her appointments, handled her medicine, and I was the one who bathed her, cooked for her, and stayed up all night when she couldn't breathe." I cut in. "We both did our part, Tiffany. This isn't a competition, but it was. It had always been." Tiffany thrived on competition, on winning. Her lips curved into a cold smile. "Fine. If you want to play this game, I'll play. But don't cry when you lose." Then she turned and marched out, slamming the door so hard that the picture frames rattled on the walls. For a long time after she left, I stood there staring at the closed door, a deep, uneasy feeling settling in my chest. This wasn't just about Mama's jewelry anymore. Tiffany had declared war, and I had a sinking feeling she was going to fight dirty. A week later, our family gathered for the traditional Sunday dinner at Aunt Lillian's house, the first one since Mama's funeral. I debated not going, but something in me refused to let Tiffany push me into hiding. I wore Mama's pearl earrings, small and simple but deeply symbolic, and I knew the moment Tiffany saw them, she'd take it as a challenge. The atmosphere was tense from the start. Everyone tiptoed around conversations about the will. My cousin Patrice tried to lighten the mood by reminiscing about our childhood, but Tiffany barely responded. Her eyes kept darting to my ears. Finally, she spoke, loudly. "It's interesting, isn't it?" she said, swirling her wine glass. "How some people cling to things that don't even belong to them." The room went silent. All eyes turned toward me. "Everything I have was given to me by Mama," I replied, steady but calm. "Oh, was it?" she sneered. "Because Mama told me the ruby earrings were always meant to go to her firstborn daughter." But apparently, promises mean nothing when greed's involved. I felt my cheeks burn, but I refused to rise to the bait. Mama put it in writing, and she trusted me for a reason. Tiffany's laughter was sharp and bitter. "Trusted you? Please. She pitied you. The struggling little sister who never quite made anything of herself." "Tiffany," Aunt Lillian hissed. But it was too late. "I mean, let's be honest," she continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "What's Ruth going to do with heirloom jewelry? Pawn it for rent money?" Laughter rippled from one or two relatives, not cruel, but nervous. Still, it was enough. I excused myself, my dignity hanging by a thread, and walked out into the cold night air. Outside, I stood alone under the porch light, my hands trembling. That dinner had made one thing painfully clear. Tiffany wasn't going to stop at words. She was preparing to destroy my reputation piece by piece, and I had no idea how far she was willing to go. 2 weeks later, the simmering tension boiled over. Aunt Lillian decided to host a brunch in Mama's honor. A sweet idea in theory, but a powder keg in reality. I almost didn't go, but a part of me still clung to hope that Tiffany and I could find some kind of peace. That hope didn't last long. The brunch was in full swing when I walked in, carrying one of Mama's favorite peach cobblers. Conversations paused. People exchanged glances. And then I saw her, Tiffany, standing in the center of the room with Mama's ruby earrings dangling from her ears. "My ruby earrings, do you like them?" she asked loudly, her voice laced with venom. "I thought I'd borrow them, since we're sharing everything now." Gasps rippled through the room. My heart thudded painfully. but I refused to give her the satisfaction of a scene. "You had no right to go into my home," I said quietly but firmly. She shrugged. "I had every right. They're half mine. Or did you forget that?" Before I could respond, she took a step closer. Too close, and in one sudden, shocking move, she grabbed the glass of water from the table and threw it straight into my face. "Give back my mother's jewelry," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You stole what's rightfully mine." The room froze. Conversations died. My cheeks burned as the cold water dripped down my face, humiliation spreading like wildfire through the stunned silence. Then came the worst part. A few relatives laughed. Nervous, awkward laughs, but laughs all the same. I set the cobbler down on the nearest table and walked out without a word. That night, I stared at Mama's letter again, clutching it like a lifeline. "Don't meet fire with fire. Stay dignified." But this wasn't about dignity anymore. Tiffany had crossed a line, and I knew, deep down, I could no longer fight this passively. If she wanted a war, then a war she would get. But I was going to fight it my way, not with rage, but with strategy. And this time, I wouldn't let her win. In the days following the brunch disaster, the fallout spread quickly, like a bad rumor on a windy day. Everyone in the family had seen what Tiffany did. Some called to check on me, embarrassed and apologetic. Others stayed silent, not wanting to pick sides. But the silence spoke volumes. The family was dividing, and Tiffany was making sure she controlled the narrative. I learned from Patrice that Tiffany had been calling relatives, telling them I'd stolen Mama's jewelry and twisted the will. She told anyone who would listen that I was greedy, manipulative, and had brainwashed Mama in her final months. "She said that?" I asked, stunned. Patrice sighed. "She's making herself the victim, Ruth, and some people, they're starting to believe her." That cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't just about jewelry anymore. She was trying to destroy my reputation, my relationship with our family, even Mama's memory of me. A week later, I ran into Tiffany at the grocery store. She strutted past me like a queen, loudly chatting on her phone. And of course, she's refusing to return what doesn't belong to her. "It's pathetic, really," I ignored her. But as I reached the checkout line, she deliberately stepped into my space. "How does it feel?" she asked, leaning in close. "To know the whole family sees you for what you really are?" "Whatever you're doing, Tiffany," I said, meeting her gaze steadily, "it won't work." "The truth always comes out," she smirked, stepping back with a casual shrug. "We'll see." That night, I received a text from an unknown number. "You might want to lawyer up." "Tiffany's filing a petition to challenge the will." My hands went cold. She was escalating, turning a family feud into a legal battle. But instead of panic, something unexpected stirred inside me. Resolve. If Tiffany wanted to fight dirty, I'd meet her with every ounce of strength Mama raised me with. And I would prove, in front of the whole world, that love, legacy, and truth were stronger than her greed. The following week, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a formal petition, Tiffany M. Harper versus Ruth L. Harper, seeking to contest the will. She claimed that Mama had been unduly influenced in her final months, that the jewelry clause was ambiguous, and that I had manipulated her into writing it. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. The lies were bold, shameless, vicious. It wasn't just a legal attack, it was an assault on my character. She was rewriting history to make me look like a villain. I called Mr. Willis immediately. "She's trying to invalidate the will," I said, my voice shaking. "I expected as much," he replied calmly. "But don't worry, Ruth. Your mother's will is airtight. And if Tiffany wants to make this a courtroom battle, she'll have to prove her claims, and that will be nearly impossible." Still, the weight of it pressed on me. Court meant public humiliation, depositions, old family wounds dragged into the open, and worst of all, Mama's name, her legacy, would be dissected in front of strangers. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into Mama's room, now still and silent, and sat on the edge of her bed. "Why did you trust me with this?" I whispered into the darkness. Why couldn't you just split everything evenly? But I knew the answer. Mama hadn't chosen me to punish Tiffany. She'd chosen me to protect what mattered, the memory, the meaning, the story behind each piece. And now, that choice was being put to the ultimate test. The next morning, I met with Mr. Willis and hired a litigation attorney. It was time to prepare for battle. The rent notice still curled on my fridge like a question I wouldn't answer. I ran numbers on a yellow pad. Utilities, the hospice balance, the cracked Corolla's timing belt. Truth wasn't just moral. It was practical. If Tiffany pried the heirlooms loose, she'd sell history to cover a lifestyle. I needed to keep a roof and a story intact. This wasn't just about jewelry anymore. It was about proving that Mama's final wishes meant something, that greed and manipulation couldn't rewrite history. And as I signed the legal documents, one thought anchored me. Tiffany might have money, arrogance, and anger on her side, but I had truth. And truth, in the end, would be my greatest weapon. By the time the news of Tiffany's legal action spread through the family, everything had changed. Invitations to gatherings stopped coming. Cousins who once texted me daily now ignored my calls. Even Aunt Lillian, who had always been my second mother, started keeping her distance. "She's telling people you're trying to cut her out completely," Patrice whispered when she finally called me. "She says Mama promised her the jewelry years ago and that you manipulated her when she was sick." My chest tightened. "That's not true. Mama made her decision months before she was even diagnosed." "I know," Patrice sighed. "But you know how people are. They believe the story that makes the most noise, and Tiffany was making plenty of noise. I saw a post on social media, a vague, passive-aggressive message about siblings who betray family trust, and though she didn't name me, everyone knew who it was about. It got dozens of supportive comments from relatives, friends, even church members. It was like being erased. I tried reaching out, calling Tiffany directly to talk things through before court, but she refused to answer. Instead, I got a curt text. "Save it for the judge." The final straw came when I stopped by Mama's grave one afternoon. Tiffany was already there, standing in front of the headstone with a bouquet of lilies. When she saw me, she didn't move. She just smirked. "Do you feel proud?" she asked coldly. "Standing over Mama's grave while you rob me blind?" I swallowed hard. "I'm not robbing you, Tiffany. Mama made a choice. I'm just honoring it." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You're going to regret this. I'll drag your name through the mud if I have to." As she stormed away, I stood by Mama's grave, shaken to my core. It wasn't just a sibling rivalry anymore. Tiffany wasn't going to stop until she'd broken me, legally, socially, emotionally. And yet, even in that moment of isolation, I whispered to Mama, "I won't let her destroy what you built." "I promise." 2 weeks later, I attended a family barbecue against my better judgment. Aunt Lillian had invited me personally, saying, "It's time the two of you talked." I knew Tiffany would be there, but I was tired of hiding. If this was going to be a war, I wouldn't fight it from the shadows. The moment I walked into the backyard, the conversations quieted. People exchanged glances. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Tiffany was sitting near the grill, surrounded by a group of relatives. When she saw me, her lips curled into a smug little smile, the kind that said, "You shouldn't have come." I tried to stay composed, greeting cousins and making polite small talk. But the tension was thick, suffocating. Then, as if on cue, Tiffany stood up and clinked her glass. "I want to make a toast," she announced loudly, "to family. And to the truth, even when some people try to hide it." Laughter rippled through her little circle. My heart pounded. "Tiffany, stop," Aunt Lillian murmured, but she ignored her. "I just think it's funny," Tiffany continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "How some people claim to honor Mama's wishes while locking away her legacy like it's their personal treasure chest. Mama always said we'd share everything, but some people only know how to take." All eyes turned to me. The humiliation was unbearable. "That's not true," I said, my voice trembling but firm. Mama's will was clear. "I'm following it exactly as she wanted." Tiffany snorted. "Sure you are. Keep telling yourself that. The laughter grew louder. One cousin muttered something under his breath, and I heard the words greedy and selfish. My chest tightened. I felt my dignity, my mother's memory, being stripped from me piece by piece. I set my drink down, turned, and walked out of that backyard before the tears could fall. That night, alone in my darkened kitchen, I stared at Mama's letter again. For the first time, I wondered if I had made a mistake by staying silent. If Tiffany wanted to fight me publicly, then maybe it was time I stopped hiding the truth. And as I folded the letter and locked it away, a thought crystallized in my mind. I'm done playing defense. The battle wasn't coming. It was already here. And I was going to win, not for the jewelry, but for Mama, for myself, and for the truth. The lawsuit notice sat on my coffee table like a ticking bomb. Every time I walked past it, my chest tightened. But instead of fear, a new emotion began to build inside me. Determination. If Tiffany wanted to drag our family name into a courtroom, then so be it. But this time, I wasn't going to walk in unprepared. I met with Mr. Willis and a litigation attorney, Ms. Carver, at her downtown office, a place filled with thick law books and the faint scent of confidence. Tiffany's claims are baseless, Ms. Carver said, flipping through the petition. But we're not just going to defend. We're going to prove her motives: greed, resentment, and deception. How? I asked. By building a narrative that shows why your mother made her decision. We'll need witness statements, evidence of your caregiving, and records of Tiffany's behavior. A slow, deliberate smile crept onto my face. I can do that. We filed our response that Friday, right on Tiffany's deadline. The next few weeks became a whirlwind of quiet strategy. I gathered medical records showing that Mama had been of sound mind when she updated her will. I contacted neighbors and church friends who remembered how I stayed by her side during her illness. Even Mama's doctor agreed to provide a statement confirming she had full mental capacity when signing the documents. But the most powerful piece of evidence came unexpectedly: a handwritten journal Mama had kept during her final months. In it, she wrote about her fears regarding Tiffany's spending habits and her trust in me to protect the legacy, not squander it. It was exactly the kind of proof we needed. Tiffany's case is about to crumble, Ms. Carver said after reviewing it, and when it does, the court will see her for who she really is. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was taking the reins. And I promised myself that when this battle was over, Tiffany wouldn't just lose a case. She'd lose the mask she'd been hiding behind all her life. If I was going to expose Tiffany's motives in court, I needed to do more than show why Mama trusted me. I needed to show why she didn't trust Tiffany. And that meant going back into the history we'd both tried to forget. I started with bank statements. Years before Mama's passing, Tiffany had borrowed thousands of dollars from her, money she'd promised to repay but never did. When Mama pressed her about it, Tiffany called her controlling and cut contact for months. Those financial records were still tucked in a folder in Mama's old desk, along with handwritten notes in Mama's neat script, loaned $8,500 to Tiffany, no repayment plan. Concerned about her spending, then came the incident with Mama's antique sapphire necklace. Tiffany had borrowed it for a gala 3 years ago and pawned it 2 weeks later to pay off a credit card bill. Mama never confronted her publicly, but she confided in me privately, saying, "If she's willing to sell our history for quick cash, how can I trust her with anything else?" I even found an email Tiffany had sent to Mama during a bitter argument over property. "You don't get to control me from beyond the grave. I'll take what's mine, one way or another." When Ms. Carver read that line, her eyes widened. "This is gold," she said. "It shows intent, and intent is everything in a will challenge." But it wasn't just legal ammunition I was gathering. Every piece of evidence I uncovered chipped away at the image Tiffany had built for herself: the perfect daughter, the responsible one, the martyr. And with each discovery I felt stronger, steadier, more certain of the truth. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice, for Mama, for myself, and for every piece of our family history Tiffany had tried to erase. And deep down, I knew. Once the court saw the real Tiffany, her entire case would collapse. And for the first time in our lives, the truth, not her lies, would define our family. The day of the first hearing arrived with a chill that seeped into my bones. I stood on the courthouse steps in a navy blue suit Mama would have loved, clutching her letter inside my bag like a talisman. It wasn't the final trial, just a preliminary hearing to set the stage, but it felt monumental. Tiffany arrived in a fitted cream dress and oversized sunglasses, flanked by her lawyer, Mr. Randall, a smug, sharp-tongued man with a reputation for theatrics. She didn't look at me as we passed in the hallway, but I caught the faintest smirk on her lips. "Ready?" Ms. Carver asked quietly as we walked into the courtroom. "More than ever," I replied. The hearing was tense from the start. Mr. Randall painted a picture of a manipulative younger sister who had isolated their mother in her final months, influenced her decisions, and unfairly seized sentimental heirlooms. He used words like exploitation and undue influence with theatrical emphasis, clearly trying to sway the judge's first impression. But Ms. Carver was ready. She calmly presented evidence that Mama had been of sound mind, medical records, signed legal documents, and sworn statements from her doctor and church friends. Then she brought out the journal. The courtroom fell silent as she read aloud Mama's words about Tiffany's impulsiveness and her decision to entrust me with the family heirlooms. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Ramirez, glanced over the journal pages and then back at Tiffany. "This does not align with the picture of manipulation painted by the petitioner," she said coolly. "It suggests a deliberate, considered choice." Tiffany shifted uncomfortably in her seat. When the hearing adjourned, the judge set the date for the full trial, 3 months from now. It was just the first round, but it was clear who had landed the stronger blow. Outside the courthouse, Tiffany brushed past me without a word, but her silence spoke volumes. Her confidence had cracked, and as I walked down the steps, the autumn air suddenly felt lighter. For the first time, I wasn't just fighting back, I was winning. If the preliminary hearing rattled Tiffany, she didn't show it publicly. In fact, the very next day, she launched a new offensive, this time not in the courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. I woke up to dozens of notifications on my phone. Social media was ablaze with a post she'd written. "It's heartbreaking when your own sister manipulates a sick, elderly parent into changing her will. Mama always said we'd share everything. Some people would rather betray family than honor their mother's memory." The post had hundreds of likes and sympathetic comments, from distant relatives, mutual friends, even members of Mama's church. People I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly calling me a thief and a liar. At first, it stung. Every cruel word was a reminder of how far Tiffany was willing to go. But then I remembered Ms. Carver's words. A desperate person always overplays their hand. And this smear campaign was exactly that. We responded strategically. Ms. Carver advised me not to engage online but to start building a community of truth. I reached out privately to people who had known Mama best, her closest friends, our church pastor, even her former caretaker. One by one, they agreed to testify about Mama's mental clarity, her unwavering trust in me, and her growing concerns about Tiffany's behavior. Then we submitted a motion to the court, introducing Mama's journal entries about Tiffany's attempts to pressure her, including that chilling email. "I'll take what's mine one way or another." The judge approved it as admissible evidence. The moment Tiffany's attorney received that notice, his tone changed. He reached out with an offer to negotiate a settlement, but I wasn't interested. This wasn't about compromise anymore. It was about truth. That night, as I locked Mama's journal back in the safe, I felt something shift inside me. I was no longer the sister defending myself against lies. I was the daughter defending my mother's legacy. And Tiffany? She was running out of moves. 2 weeks before the trial, a message popped up on my phone from an unfamiliar number. I worked for your mother. I know things about Tiffany you might want to hear. Can we talk? At first, I thought it was a prank. But curiosity and a gnawing instinct told me to respond. That evening, I met the sender at a small cafe downtown. She introduced herself as Marlene, Mama's part-time homemaid from the last year of her life. I didn't want to get involved, Marlene said nervously, stirring her tea. But after seeing what your sister's saying about you, I can't stay quiet. What do you know? I asked, leaning forward. She took a deep breath. Tiffany tried to get your mother to sign over some of her jewelry, months before she passed. I was in the room when she brought papers and said they were just routine updates. But your mom refused. She told me afterward that Tiffany had been pressuring her for weeks. My heart pounded. Would you be willing to testify to that? Yes, Marlene said without hesitation. I'll tell the court exactly what I heard and saw. That wasn't all. Marlene also revealed that Tiffany had taken Mama to a different attorney months earlier, one who specialized in estate transfers, but that attorney refused to proceed because Mama seemed unsure and possibly coerced. We tracked down the lawyer, who agreed to provide a sworn statement confirming Tiffany's attempts to alter the estate before Mama updated her will. It was the smoking gun we needed, proof not just of greed, but of deliberate manipulation. When Ms. Carver saw the evidence, she smiled for the first time in weeks. This changes everything. Tiffany's narrative will collapse the moment this witness takes the stand. I walked out of that meeting with renewed strength. Tiffany had spent months painting me as the villain. But the truth, piece by piece, was stripping away her lies. For the first time, I could see the endgame clearly. Justice wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. And this time, it would be Tiffany answering for her actions. Just when I thought Tiffany was cornered, she made a surprising move, one that caught me completely off guard. 3 days before the trial, her attorney, Mr. Randall, called Ms. Carver with a proposal. Tiffany wanted to meet privately, without lawyers, to resolve things as a family. At first, I laughed. After everything she'd done, the lies, the humiliation, the lawsuit, she wanted to talk? But Ms. Carver advised me to accept. It could be a strategic move, she said. And if she's desperate enough to negotiate, that tells us something. We met at Aunt Lillian's house, neutral ground. Tiffany arrived in a tailored gray suit, her expression carefully composed. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the smugness, the arrogance. In its place was something else. Calculation. I don't want this to tear the family apart, she began, voice soft, almost rehearsed. We're sisters. We've lost our mother. None of this is worth it. I folded my arms. Then why file a lawsuit? Why smear my name? Her eyes hardened slightly. I was angry, hurt. I felt cheated. But maybe we can fix this. I'll withdraw the petition if you agree to split the jewelry evenly, or sell it and split the money. There it was. Not remorse. Not reconciliation. A negotiation. A last-ditch attempt to salvage something before the walls closed in. No, I said firmly. I'm not selling Mama's legacy to make this go away. She made her wishes clear, and I'm honoring them. Her mask cracked for just a second. If this goes to trial, I'll tell the court things that will ruin you, she hissed. Then I guess I'll see you there, I replied, standing up. The meeting ended with silence and a slammed door. But as I walked out into the chilly afternoon, I felt more certain than ever. Tiffany wasn't trying to make peace. She was trying to bait me into compromise because she knew she was losing, and if she thought I would fold now, after everything, she was about to learn just how strong I'd become. The morning before the trial, I received a call from Patrice that made my stomach turn. Ruth, she said, her voice shaking, Tiffany just went on live TV. What? I nearly dropped my phone. I turned on the television, and there she was, my sister, sitting across from a local talk show host, dabbing fake tears from the corners of her eyes. My mother's last days were confusing, she said, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. I believe Ruth took advantage of that confusion to get control of everything. Mama would never have chosen to leave me out of something so important. The host nodded sympathetically. And how has this affected your family? Tiffany sighed dramatically. It's torn us apart. I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing this for justice. To protect my mother's true wishes. The segment lasted 15 minutes, but it felt like a knife twisting deeper with every second. Within hours, the story spread across social media. Comment sections filled with strangers calling me a manipulator, a thief, even a parasite. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. But instead of breaking me, it lit a fire under me. I called Ms. Carver. We're not just going to win this case, I said, voice steady. We're going to expose every single lie. Then let's do exactly that, she replied. That night, our legal team finalized the witness list and evidence exhibits, the financial records, the emails, the testimony from Mama's doctor, Marlene the aide, and even the estate lawyer who'd refused to work with Tiffany. Piece by piece, we had built a wall of truth she couldn't climb. And then I added one last piece. Mama's handwritten journal. The pages where she wrote about her fears of Tiffany's greed and her trust in me to protect their legacy. Let Tiffany have her TV audience, I thought. The courtroom was where the real story would be told. And tomorrow, the whole world would see who was telling the truth and who was hiding behind a performance. The morning of the trial dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that mirrors the weight in your chest. I stood on the courthouse steps for a long moment, clutching Mama's locket beneath my blouse, the one piece of jewelry I refused to leave behind. It was more than a necklace now. It was a reminder of why I was fighting. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation. Rows of benches were filled with relatives, reporters, and curious onlookers who'd been following Tiffany's media spectacle. At the front, Tiffany sat poised and picture-perfect, dressed in somber black with just the right amount of sadness across her face. She didn't look at me once. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. This court is now in session, Judge Ramirez announced. Tiffany's attorney, Mr. Randall, went first. His opening statement was polished and dramatic, portraying Tiffany as a devoted daughter cruelly excluded from her rightful inheritance. He accused me of manipulating a frail woman in her final days, of exploiting my position as caregiver to gain control. She was vulnerable, he declared, and Ruth took advantage of that vulnerability. I wanted to scream, to shout the truth, but Ms. Carver squeezed my hand under the table. Our turn is coming, she whispered, and it did. Ms. Carver's opening was calm, factual, and devastating. The evidence will show that their mother, Ms. May Harper, was of sound mind when she wrote her will. It will show that Ruth honored her mother's wishes, while Tiffany repeatedly attempted to coerce changes to the estate. And most importantly, it will show that this case is not about justice, but about greed. Then she held up a familiar leather-bound journal. This is May Harper's own handwriting. And it will tell the truth Tiffany is trying to bury. For the first time, Tiffany's mask slipped. I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes, small but unmistakable. Day 1 ended with the courtroom buzzing. The battle lines were drawn. The truth was finally stepping into the light, and I was ready to fight until the very end. Day 2 of the trial began with testimony from Mama's closest friends, the people who had been there in her final months. First was Ms. Odette, our longtime neighbor and practically a second mother to both of us. She walked to the stand with a calm dignity that instantly commanded respect. I spoke with May 2 weeks before she passed, Odette said, voice steady. She was perfectly lucid. She told me she wanted Ruth to keep certain heirlooms safe because she trusted her to protect their history. Did she ever express concern about Tiffany? Ms. Carver asked gently. Odette hesitated, then nodded. Yes. She said Tiffany's priorities worried her, that she was more interested in the monetary value of the jewelry than its meaning. Mr. Randall tried to rattle her on cross-examination, suggesting her memory was clouded by grief, but Odette didn't waver. I know what May said, and she was crystal clear about her wishes. Next came Pastor Williams, Mama's pastor. May was strong and in full control of her decisions, he testified. She often said, Ruth will protect what matters. Tiffany might sell it. Each witness strengthened our case, not just legally but emotionally. Piece by piece, the courtroom began to see a pattern. A mother making thoughtful choices, and a daughter trying to rewrite them. Then Marlene took the stand. The room shifted when she described Tiffany bringing documents for Mama to sign and pressuring her when she refused. I was right there, Marlene said firmly. Mrs. Harper told me she felt bullied. Mr. Randall's face tightened. He tried to paint Marlene as misinterpreting things, but the damage was done. During a recess, I caught a glimpse of Tiffany whispering furiously to her attorney. Her jaw was clenched, her hands shaking slightly, a crack in her polished facade. It was the first time I realized the truth wasn't just winning in the courtroom, it was changing the narrative. The family members who once believed Tiffany's lies were watching them unravel in real time. We also called Yvette Daniels, Mama's longtime jeweler. Her testimony was brief but clean. The locket stone was original, and months earlier Tiffany had asked about swapping it. Yvette refused. There's one more thing, Yvette added, glancing at the locket before turning to the judge. Mrs. Harper asked me to appraise a garnet ring last spring. She made me write the provenance on the receipt, from May's mother to Ruth on graduation. She said, Tiffany thinks the big stones are what matter. The ring is what carries the women. It was the same locket I wore under my blouse in court. A murmur rolled through the gallery. Mr. Randall stiffened. Ms. Carver simply nodded. The blue ink note on the appraisal matched the handwriting in the journal. And with every testimony, Mama's voice, silenced by death, grew louder. By the third day of testimony, the courtroom was packed. Word of the trial had spread beyond family gossip. Now, neighbors, church members, even old family friends filled the benches, and they were about to hear the piece of evidence that would blow Tiffany's story apart. Your Honor, Ms. Carver said, rising from her seat, we'd like to introduce Exhibit 27, Mrs. May Harper's financial records and associated loan documentation. I pulled the copies from Mama's blue ledger, the same one she flagged for me on the napkin. Tiffany shifted in her chair. Mr. Randall immediately objected, but the judge overruled him. The first witness of the day was Mr. Hollis, a financial advisor who had helped Mama organize her estate. Calmly, he walked the court through a series of transactions: bank withdrawals, unexplained transfers, and several loans issued to Tiffany over the last decade. Mrs. Harper expressed concern about her daughter's financial decisions. Mr. Hollis testified. She specifically told me she feared Tiffany would liquidate family heirlooms to pay off debts if they were left in her care. Ms. Carver clicked to the next slide, a bank statement, showing a loan of $8,500 that Tiffany had never repaid. Then another, a $12,000 withdrawal that matched a pawnshop deposit. And finally, the most damaging document of all, a receipt from 3 years ago showing that Tiffany had pawned Mama's antique sapphire necklace for cash. The courtroom gasped. Tiffany's face flushed a deep crimson. Ms. Harper, Ms. Carver said coolly, did your mother know you had sold one of her heirlooms? I intended to buy it back, Tiffany stammered. It was a temporary situation. And did you? Her silence was answer enough. The judge scribbled notes furiously. Even Mr. Randall looked shaken. By the time Mr. Hollis stepped down, the courtroom's mood had shifted entirely. Tiffany was no longer the grieving daughter. She was the daughter who had repeatedly exploited her mother's trust for money. I glanced at her across the aisle. She refused to meet my gaze. For years, Tiffany had painted me as the villain. But now, under oath, her greed was doing the work for me. The truth wasn't just coming out, it was detonating. And there was no putting it back. The fourth day of trial started quietly, but by the afternoon, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from tense to electric. Because that was the day Ms. Carver presented the most explosive piece of evidence yet. Your Honor, she said, her tone measured but deliberate. We would like to submit Exhibit 31, an email sent from the petitioner, Tiffany Harper, to her mother, May Harper, approximately 6 months before her death. The clerk handed a printed copy to the judge. Tiffany's attorney objected on grounds of irrelevance, but the judge raised a hand. I'll allow it. Proceed. Ms. Carver walked slowly toward the witness stand. Ms. Harper, she said, looking directly at Tiffany, did you write this email? Tiffany shifted in her seat. I don't recall. Then let me refresh your memory. Ms. Carver read the email aloud, each word slicing through the courtroom. If you don't sign the property transfer papers, I swear I will take what's mine one way or another. Don't think Ruth will stop me. She's too weak to fight back. A stunned silence fell over the room. Even the judge's expression hardened. Did you send this email? Ms. Carver repeated. Tiffany swallowed, her voice barely audible. Yes, but I was angry. I didn't mean it. Angry enough to threaten your dying mother with coercion? Ms. Carver pressed. Angry enough to say you would take what's yours one way or another? Mr. Randall leapt to his feet with an objection, but the damage was already done. The gallery, family members, friends, strangers, sat frozen, faces a mixture of disbelief and disgust. Judge Ramirez leaned forward. Ms. Harper, this email severely undermines your credibility. It strongly suggests intent and malice. I watched as Tiffany's composure cracked completely. Her hands trembled. Her attorney whispered frantically in her ear, but it was too late. For years, Tiffany had hidden her greed behind carefully chosen words. Now those very words were condemning her, and in that moment, I knew the tide of this battle had fully turned. Tiffany wasn't just losing, she was unraveling. The day after the email revelation, Tiffany's team tried desperately to recover. They called a string of character witnesses, old friends, former colleagues, even a distant cousin, each painting her as a loving daughter and a generous sister. But the court told the real story. The damage had been done. I sat beside Ms. Carver, quietly confident. Every glowing testimony was followed by cross-examination that stripped it bare. Ms. Lewis, Ms. Carver asked one witness gently, are you aware that Tiffany threatened her mother with coercion 6 months before her passing? The woman blinked. No. And were you aware that she attempted to withdraw $50,000 from a joint account under May Harper's name 3 days after that email was sent? No, the woman whispered, shrinking in her seat. Each witness left the stand looking smaller than when they'd arrived, but the real blow came when Tiffany herself took the stand again. Her lawyer tried to frame her as misunderstood, a grieving daughter acting out of desperation. I was angry because my mother was cutting me out of the will, Tiffany testified, her voice trembling slightly. But I never meant to hurt anyone. I just wanted what I thought I deserved. Ms. Carver rose for cross-examination. Her tone was surgical. Ms. Harper, is it true you transferred $15,000 from your mother's medical fund into your personal account just 2 weeks before her death? Tiffany's face flushed crimson. I was going to pay it back. But you didn't. I forgot. And you expect this court to believe your actions were those of a loving daughter? The courtroom was so silent I could hear Tiffany's breath quicken. Her answers became shorter, more defensive. She contradicted herself twice in less than 5 minutes. Even Judge Ramirez leaned forward, scribbling furious notes. When Tiffany finally stepped down, she no longer looked like the confident woman who'd once splashed water in my face and called me a thief. She looked cornered, exposed, and terrified. And I realized, with a slow, deep breath, that justice was no longer a distant hope. It was closing in on her, step by step. Just when I thought the trial had reached its peak, Ms. Carver stood and calmly said the words that made Tiffany's entire body stiffen. Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence to submit. A document previously undisclosed to this court. The final, superseding will of May Harper. A collective gasp swept through the room. Tiffany's lawyer sprang to his feet. Objection. This is highly irregular. Overruled, Judge Ramirez said sharply. If the document is authentic, it is admissible. Proceed. The bailiff passed the sealed envelope forward. My heart pounded as Ms. Carver gently unfolded the aged paper. This will was discovered during a private investigation, she explained. It was filed with attorney Calvin Rhodes 3 months before May Harper's passing and supersedes all prior versions. It had been archived in Rhodes's private client vault after a staff turnover. Willis conducted the initial reading from the last will in his direct file. She turned to the judge. In this will, May leaves the jewelry collection in dispute entirely to my client, Ruth Harper, along with explicit instructions that it be preserved as a family heirloom for Ruth's children. The courtroom exploded with murmurs. Tiffany's face drained of color. "That's impossible," she shouted, half rising from her seat. She said she changed it." "Did she tell you?" Ms. Carver asked coolly. "Before or after you threatened her with that email?" Tiffany opened and closed her mouth like a fish gasping for air. She told me she would reconsider, but she didn't," Ms. Carver said firmly. "And legally, that means this is the binding will." Judge Ramirez reviewed the document with meticulous care. "This will appears valid and notarized. Unless substantial evidence is presented to the contrary, the court must accept it." The petitioner looked defeated. Tiffany slumped in her chair, her manicured hands trembling. Every carefully built lie, every accusation, every attempt to paint me as a thief, all of it had just been obliterated by our mother's own words. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. This was the moment I'd been fighting for. Not just for the jewelry, not even for myself, but for Mama, for the truth she'd tried to leave behind, even when she knew Tiffany might try to erase it. Justice wasn't just closing in now. It had arrived. The courtroom was electric after the will's revelation. Even the judge's expression had shifted. Gone was the neutral patience. In its place was something far more severe. Tiffany, once so composed and arrogant, now looked like a woman clinging to the edge of a cliff with nothing but her fingernails. Her lawyer tried one last desperate maneuver. "Your Honor, the will's sudden appearance is suspicious. My client was under the impression that a newer document existed, naming her as primary heir." Judge Ramirez adjusted her glasses and fixed Tiffany with a piercing stare. "Ms. Harper, do you have any proof of this alleged newer will?" Tiffany's lips parted, but no sound came out. No, it was a conversation. She told me, then the court cannot consider hearsay over a legally binding notarized document. Her gavel tapped lightly, but the sound echoed like thunder. At this point, the evidence overwhelmingly supports Ruth's position. A ripple of whispers filled the room. Some were from spectators, others from reporters scribbling furiously. I heard someone behind me murmur, "She's finished," and they were right, but Ms. Carver wasn't done. "Your Honor," she said, "we also submit financial records showing that Ms. Harper attempted to liquidate portions of the estate before probate was even filed. This was not only presumptuous, it was illegal." The judge turned sharply to Tiffany. "Is this true?" Tiffany's lawyer started to speak, but the judge silenced him with a wave. "I want to hear it from her." Tiffany's voice shook. I only did that because I believed the assets were mine." "Belief does not grant ownership," the judge replied sternly. "And attempting to claim property not legally yours could have serious consequences." Her face crumpled. The woman who once hurled accusations and insults now sat small and powerless before the court. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt something deeper, a quiet vindication that went beyond revenge. This wasn't just about jewelry or inheritance anymore. It was about truth, about restoring my mother's legacy and reclaiming the dignity Tiffany tried to destroy. And for the first time in years, I felt that dignity fully return. By the time court adjourned that afternoon, Tiffany's entire petition had collapsed like a house of cards. The forged narrative, the accusations, the carefully crafted lies, all of it lay in pieces on the floor. But what no one expected was the spectacular way she would unravel next. The following morning, the courtroom was silent when Tiffany took the stand for the final time. Her lawyer's tone was softer now, almost pleading. "Ms. Harper, would you like to make a statement to the court before closing arguments?" She hesitated. For a moment, I thought she'd refuse. But then something inside her cracked. "Yes," she whispered. "I want to speak." Tiffany rose, gripping the edges of the witness stand as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "I'm not going to lie anymore," she began, her voice raw and trembling. "Yes, I sent that email. Yes, I tried to move the money, and yes, I knew about the will." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Even her lawyer looked blindsided. "I was angry," she continued. "Angry that Mama always favored Ruth. Angry that she left her the jewelry, the heirlooms, the things I thought were mine. I convinced myself I deserved them, that I was taking back what was owed." She looked at me then, eyes red and wet. "But I see now that I became everything I accused you of being, selfish, cruel, dishonest." My heart hammered in my chest. For so long, I had dreamed of this moment, the day she would finally tell the truth. Yet standing there, hearing the bitterness and regret in her voice, it felt nothing like victory. It felt heavy, human. "I ruined our family," she whispered. "I dishonored Mama's memory. And I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to stop lying." The judge allowed a brief recess. As Tiffany was led away, she stumbled slightly, her once defiant posture completely gone. I sat in stunned silence. The sister who once hurled water in my face and screamed for her jewelry was gone. In her place stood a broken woman, facing the weight of her own choices. And for the first time, I realized justice was already doing its work. The final day of the trial arrived with a weight that hung heavy in the courtroom air. Every seat was filled. Neighbors, extended relatives, even strangers from town who had followed the case in the papers. It wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a public reckoning of betrayal and truth, of greed and justice. Tiffany sat at the petitioner's table, pale and hollow-eyed, a shadow of the proud, defiant woman who had once stormed into my home and accused me of theft. Across the aisle, I sat at the respondent's defense table beside my attorney. Hands folded tightly in my lap, the jewelry box, my mother's jewelry box, resting quietly as evidence before the judge. "All rise," the bailiff called, and we stood as Judge Ramirez entered. She glanced over the room before clearing her throat and speaking in a firm, deliberate voice. After careful review of the evidence, testimony, and Ms. Harper's own admissions, the court finds conversion and bad faith interference with the estate and imposes sanctions for obstruction of probate administration. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Tiffany closed her eyes, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. The judge continued, her tone less severe now but no less resolute. "However, given the nature of this being a family matter and Ms. Harper's full confession, I am opting for a sentence of full restitution, return of all heirlooms, injunctive relief, and payment of Ruth's reasonable attorney's fees and costs. Further, the matter is referred to the district attorney for potential criminal review. Contempt sanctions are stayed conditioned on immediate compliance." The gavel struck. Bang. It was over. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Justice, real, tangible justice, had been served. My mother's jewelry was returned, the will was upheld, and the estate remained under my stewardship, just as Mama intended. Tiffany approached me hesitantly as the courtroom emptied. Her voice was barely audible. "I'm so sorry, Ruth, for everything." For a long moment, I said nothing. Then quietly but firmly, I replied, "This is where accountability begins, Tiffany, not where it ends. If you want forgiveness, you'll have to earn it." Outside the courthouse, rain began. Soft at first, then real. Months ago, Tiffany baptized me in humiliation with a glass of water. Today, the sky rinsed the courthouse steps clean. I tilted my face up and let it happen. 3 weeks after the verdict, the house finally felt quiet again. No lawyers' calls. No court notices. No pacing the kitchen rehearsing what I'd say on the stand. Just silence, and the faint hum of life slowly finding its rhythm once more. I was in the attic that morning, sorting through boxes of Mama's old things, a ritual I had avoided since the trial began. The scent of cedar and faint perfume filled the air. Beneath a yellowed quilt, I found a letter addressed in her delicate handwriting. To my daughters, Ruth and Tiffany, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And I know you're probably fighting. I pray you aren't, but I know my girls. I smiled through tears. Mama had always known. The jewelry you're fighting over is more than gold. It's our story, handed down by women who survived harder lives than ours. I gave them to Ruth because I trust her to guard that story. But I also trust her to remember that no inheritance matters more than the bond you two share. Her words landed like a soft ache. Even from the grave, Mama was still trying to hold us together. That afternoon, I drove to Tiffany's house for the first time in nearly a year. When she opened the door, she looked stunned and maybe a little hopeful. I found something, I said, handing her the letter. It's from Mama. Her hands shook as she read. Tears streamed quietly. For a long time, neither of us spoke. All that anger and noise between us finally thinned to silence. Maybe this was the first step toward setting it free. Come in, she said at last. The same kitchen where we'd once shared gossip now felt foreign and fragile. We sat across from each other at the table like strangers. Two women who had walked through hell and somehow come back. I've read this letter before, Tiffany whispered, folding the paper carefully. But it feels different now. I hear her voice this time. I nodded. She knew us too well. Her voice cracked. I don't expect forgiveness. Not after what I did. The lies, the lawsuit, the humiliation. I was jealous, Ruth. Angry that Mama trusted you more. I took a slow breath. I won't lie. There were days I hated you. But I also know what grief does. It twists love until it doesn't look like love anymore. Tiffany's eyes filled again. I want to fix things. Not just with you, with everyone. I reached across the table. Then start with truth. Always. No more secrets. Her hand trembled as she squeezed mine. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something real. A few weeks later, she invited me for dinner. Nothing fancy. Okra stew, cornbread, and two sisters trying to learn how to talk again. We stumbled through small talk until laughter came, awkward at first, then genuine. I forgot how you used to steal the biggest piece of cornbread, Tiffany teased. You still owe me one, I said, grinning. She smiled in a way I hadn't seen since before Mama got sick, unguarded, almost young. Then she stood, went to the counter, and returned with a small velvet pouch. Inside was the delicate gold locket, the one Yvette had refused to alter. I kept this, Tiffany said softly. Told myself I deserved at least one piece. But it's yours. It always was. I held it in my palm, tears stinging. Thank you, I whispered. This means more than you know. That night, I placed the locket beside Mama's photo. For the first time since she died, I felt something like peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because we were finally trying. When Aunt Celia announced she wanted to host a family reunion, I hesitated. But I agreed. Maybe it was time to test whether the bridge Tiffany and I were rebuilding could hold more than just us. The event was held at our childhood home, the same creaky old house where we once fought over pie and shared secrets under quilts. Inside, the smell of collard greens and baked macaroni wrapped around me like memory. Tiffany was there early, arranging lilies on the table. Our eyes met. She smiled, tentative but real. Help me with these napkins, she asked. It was a small thing, but I heard the weight beneath it. Help me belong again. We worked side by side, passing plates, greeting cousins, trading soft smiles instead of barbs. When Uncle Martin raised his glass and toasted to family, not the perfect kind, but the kind that fights and forgives, I clinked mine gently against Tiffany's. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For giving me a chance to be your sister again. No perfect words came, so I just nodded through tears. Forgiveness hadn't erased the past, but it had opened the door to a different future. A few days later, Tiffany called. Can we talk? Just us. We met at a quiet cafe we used to visit during college breaks. The clatter of cups and hum of jazz made the silence between us feel almost normal. I know I don't deserve it, she began, voice trembling. But I want to start over. Not pretend none of it happened, just start clean. I studied her face. The arrogance that once fueled her was gone. What remained was exhaustion and hope. I'm willing, I said. But it has to be honest this time. No half-truths, no secrets. I can do that. And you'll have to make things right with the rest of the family. I forgave you, but they saw what you did. They need to see the change too. She nodded slowly. Then I'll show them. That day we didn't solve everything. But we drew a map of how to move forward. Step by step. Truth by truth. 2 weeks later, Tiffany kept her word. Our family had gathered for Sunday brunch at Aunt Celia's house when Tiffany asked to speak. The chatter died down. She stood near the window, nervous but resolute. I need to say something, she began, voice steady but fragile. For a long time, I let jealousy poison me. I hurt my sister. I humiliated her. I tried to make her small because I couldn't face my own mistakes. The room went still. There's no excuse for what I did. But I want you all to know that I'm sorry, and that I'm proving it through what I do next. When she finished, silence lingered before Aunt Celia stepped forward and hugged her. Then Uncle Martin. Then one by one, the others followed. Finally, I rose. Tiffany turned toward me, tears streaking her cheeks. I don't expect you to forgive me, she whispered. But I already did, I said, pulling her into a hug. This is how we heal. And for the first time, I believed it. In the months that followed, Tiffany changed. Not overnight, but piece by piece. She visited Mama's grave with me every Sunday. At first, we stood silently. Then, words began to fill the space. Do you think Mama would forgive me? She asked one afternoon. She already did, I told her. She believed love was stronger than mistakes. After that, she began visiting neighbors she'd alienated, writing letters to relatives she'd wronged, even volunteering at the same community center where Mama once worked. One day, she handed me a small box filled with handwritten notes, letters of apology she'd sent to people she'd hurt. I had to clean up the mess I made, she said. Not just with you, with everyone. I looked through the letters, sincere, raw, full of humility. It was then I realized she wasn't just asking for forgiveness anymore. She was living it. The sister I used to know was slowly resurfacing. By autumn, we weren't just coexisting, we were sisters again. She came over every Saturday morning with coffee and pastries, insisting on helping me garden. We spent hours in the yard, hands dirty, hearts light. One morning, as we planted daffodils, Tiffany spoke quietly. I used to envy you so much it hurt, she said. I thought Mama loved you more. I set my gloves down. And I used to think you were stronger than me, like I'd always be standing in your shadow. We laughed softly. The kind of laughter that heals. That's the thing about resentment, she said. It blinds you. It does, I agreed. But we're here now, and that means something. It did. Every cup of coffee, every shared chore, every small truth was another stitch in the fabric we'd torn apart. And this time, we weren't trying to be perfect sisters, just honest ones. That evening, as the sun dipped low, she rested her head on my shoulder. Thank you, she murmured. For what? For not giving up on me, I smiled. Family doesn't give up. We just find our way back. Winter came, crisp and quiet, marking a year since Mama's passing. Tiffany called first. I was thinking maybe we could plan something together, something to honor her properly. We decided on a small memorial at the community center Mama had loved. Tiffany handled most of it, flowers, photos, food. It wasn't just for Mama. It was for redemption. During the ceremony, Tiffany asked to speak. My mother was the most selfless person I've ever known, she said, voice steady. And for a long time, I failed to live up to her example. But I've spent this year trying to honor her, not with words, but with change. I hope she sees that. And I hope she's proud. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Afterward, she handed me an envelope, a bill of gift and sworn acknowledgement. Officially recording the heirloom collection in my name. It's yours, she said. It always was. I hugged her, whispering, Mama would be proud. I hope so, she said. But more than that, I hope you are. And for the first time, I truly was. We had come full circle, from betrayal to forgiveness, from bitterness to love, and I felt Mama smiling somewhere close. A year later, spring sunlight poured over the garden. The daffodils we planted were blooming again. Tiffany knelt beside me, humming one of Mama's old hymns as we worked. We still had our differences, we always would, but we'd learned something priceless: how to love with boundaries, forgive without forgetting, and build something stronger from what once was broken. As we sat on the porch sipping sweet tea, Tiffany turned to me. You know, there were times I thought we'd never get here. You almost didn't, I teased. We laughed, the kind of unguarded laughter that once felt impossible. Then I said, forgiveness isn't pretending it never happened. It's deciding the past doesn't get to define the future. I wanted you in mine, not the version who hurt me, but the one sitting here now. Tears shimmered in her eyes. Thank you for giving me another chance to be the sister I should have been. You gave yourself that chance, I said. I just met you halfway. Later, as dusk fell, I visited Mama's grave alone. I placed a bouquet of lilies and whispered, We're okay now, Mama. It took time, but we made it. The wind stirred softly, and for the first time in years, peace didn't feel like a distant idea. It felt like home. If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it. If you have a unique story of your own, share it in the comments below. Thank you for listening.